This video is brought to you by Artistworks. Artistworks are part of TrueFire Studios, and they offer direct access to master musicians through their innovative online learning platform. Partnering with iconic musicians, they've crafted decades of industry experience into guided paths of online learning. Crucially, there's an option to get personalized feedback tailored specifically to your playing via their unique video exchange. Get direct guidance towards your playing goals. You can use the code GNC40 for 40% off of any of Artistworks courses. Okay, so the Boss ME-90 came out a few weeks ago. I bought one because I thought that's quite an interesting little piece of kit, right? And the idea of the ME-90 is to chuck some of the amp models from the new kind of Boss GT, GX100 type stuff into this kind of more familiar format where you're dealing with lots of knobs. And yeah, for me, it was a really interesting experience because I'm very used to using like the Helix fractal stuff and getting into menus and bits and pieces like that. It was kind of refreshing to get back into a space where you've more or less got what you see is what you get. I thought, and I think I was asked this as well, the most obvious comparison that one might make might be to what I think is Boss's best modeler to date, to be honest with you, the GX100. So physically, they're very similar. Okay, so they're going to sit within the same sort of format. I think the GX100 is a smidge heavier. One cool thing about the Boss ME-90 is that it is powered by a battery, so this thing really useful in that way. Another kind of cool thing about the ME-90 is that it's more or less kind of plug and play-ish, right? I think the factory presets on both units leave quite a lot to be desired. There is the Boss tone exchange for both of these units, and I will be doing a tone set for the ME-90 soon. I have already done one for the GX100, but just plugging in the GX100 today, I was reminded of how good you can get that unit to sound. So, here are a couple of negatives with the ME-90 that the GX100 doesn't have, and I think that basically for me is why it doesn't need to be the longest video ever, because there are some semi kind of deal breakers for me, or not deal breakers, but reasons that I would choose the GX100 over this. So this is £300. The GX100 is not too much more expensive at £488. So both of these pretty reasonably priced models, it has to be said. So the negatives with the ME-90, as I see them, are that the delay block, as far as I can tell, and I've experimented with this a fair amount. When it comes to home use, I use studio monitors, and for me, having things in stereo, particularly with your delay stuff, can mean that things sound less crowded in the middle. So you can have kind of higher mixes with these ping-ponging delays and still retain some clarity up the center of your mix. For me, stereo delay is almost essential. I wouldn't say it's necessarily really essential, but it's one of those things that I started to notice that I was missing it, because if I dial in somewhat similar tones when all of my delay is up the center with my normal kind of lead tone, things get quite a bit muddied up, whereas if they're off to the side of the stereo field, things don't get so muddy. Another thing for me, which is a slight negative of the ME-90, is that you don't have super powerful EQ blocks. So the EQs that you have are somewhat simple. You've got bass, middle, treble, and level, whereas in the GX100 you have parametric and graphic EQs, which are a lot easier, a lot more flexible in terms of dialing in the tones that you want. So for instance, for me on my lead tones, generally if I'm using quite a bit of gain, what I tend to do is use a bit of a high cut to roll off some of that stuff, so you get less of the fizziness that is associated with, you know, putting a mic really close to a speaker and cranking gain. It's a thing that I use on pretty much every modeler, quad cortex, helix, in the fractal world as well, just to take the hair off of things and get rid of some of that sizzle. Because you can't do that in the ME-90, when I compare the tones that I dialed in on either, essentially this is going to sound a little bit more kind of hairy, a little bit more sizzly, which may not be a bad thing, but it's not exactly what I would choose to dial in given the choice. So another thing that we can't do so much of on the ME-90, and that I really like to do in the GX100, one of the tips that other GT1000 and GT users let me know about was that in the speaker cab section of the GX100, there is a microphone option called flat. Now this can really, I think, tip the tones over the edge in terms of being something that I quite like the sound of to something I think, wow, that's really good. The speakers in this are kind of chosen for you automatically, and you can't change the mic type as far as I'm aware. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Let me double check that. Yeah, so basically the amps in here are paired with their original speaker type, and you can't change the microphone, which is exactly what I do in the GX100 to dial in tones a little bit closer to what I'd be going for. You can load your own IRs in here, and obviously you can do the same in the GX100, but that's just one little bit of flexibility, again, that I made use of within the GX100, and I think the tones sound better for it. Now, the other thing that you can do with the GX100 that you can't do with this, you've got dual amping capabilities, or you can have like a dual path where you can switch between two different bits and pieces that are going on, making this actually super flexible for live use. So you could have a preset set up, for instance, with on one line you could have like your heavier tones, and on the other you could have a clean tone and switch between them with the control switch. Quite flexible in that way, and it allows you to, you know, have kind of these seamless bits and pieces that sound really good. This does have seamless-ish patch switching, so trails are sort of global, so you get like a nice transition between tones. So that is really cool from this. You have to set the GX100 up in a certain way, so you have to have pretty much identical signal paths between patches for that to translate across. But it is really easy to basically set up an entire gig's worth of tones within one preset anyway, one patch, because you can have amp switching within that. Quite powerful in that way. So it takes the edge on that as well. Now, in terms of list of effects, list of amps, this has reportedly 11 amps, but if you go into the selectable, you've got a few more choices. So I saw a comment saying, unfortunately, there's not a boutique in the Boss M90. There actually is. So the boutique is one of my more favourite amps in here, as well as the Vox. But there are a few options missing. And as well, the effects list is somewhat pared down. I think there's about 60 on here, or in here. And there are about 154 or something like that on the GX100. The GX100 as well, the parameters are much more tweakable. And so on the amp models, for instance, you have things like presence, you have sag and resonance controls, and likewise across the whole range of effects, you've got much more granularity and much more tweakability. Not really too much in the way of comparison on that. You can get into these effects like you could on the actual Boss pedals and make some tweaks. And, you know, for instance, your plate reverbs, you could change high cuts and damping and all that sort of stuff. So really quite a lot more power in that way. This also has MIDI, as well as some additional controls that you can chuck in here. So you've got amp control 1, 2, control 3, 4, expression 2. The outputs on here are somewhat more limited. One thing that I really like about the ME-90, which I think I'd like to see Boss bring across to their other units, is the freeze function on the pedal here. And one thing I will say about the ME-90 is really kind of quick and easy to use. You don't really need to do too much manual delving. But for me, I think really what seals it is that, all things considered, if I'm tweaking in Tone Studio or on the unit itself, this allows me greater flexibility, greater options in terms of actual amps and effects that are in there. And I think because of things like the EQ and being able to change the speakers to that flat option on the microphone, being able to change sag and resonance on the amp models, and being able to change the presence on the amp models, I think for me the GX100 would be the way that I go. They both have audio interfaces built in, so you're kind of set up from that front. I think they're both relatively straightforward audio interfaces. I don't think you can send DI signal from them. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about that. Both of them, you can add a Bluetooth adapter for Bluetooth support. But for me, this would be the choice, I think. We've got a ground lift on here as well. And yeah, the GX100 for me is, I think, my favorite Boss unit. And just plugging it in today and playing some of those tones reminded me of just that. So ME-90, a few little things that I would choose this over it for. Another benefit of it, however, 9-volt adapter. So, you know, you could power that with basically any normal adapter or AA batteries. Quite cool in that way. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Is there a reason that you went for an ME-90 over the other Boss products? Or can you think of other products in general that you choose instead of these? I think for me, this is the most gig ready. You can assign loads of stuff to these buttons. It's pretty much ready to go. I really like the GX100. I'll catch you in another video soon. The tones that you heard in this video from the GX100 are up on the Boss Tone Exchange if you want to check those out. But yeah, I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers.